Buenas noches. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Can everyone hear me okay? Am I coming through out there? Yeah, all right. Well, on behalf of the Human Rights Center, I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's event. My name is Alexi Berlind, and I produce the events and direct the Student Fellowship Program for the Human Rights Center here at Berkeley Law. Today marks the 10th anniversary of the abduction of the 43 Ayotzinapa students in Guerrero, Mexico. We have three incredible panelists to discuss this story this evening, including Omar Gomez Trejo, who is the former lead prosecutor of the Ayotzinapa case in Mexico, and who we are now honored to have as a visiting scholar at the Human Rights Center. Lene Guercke, who is a senior researcher with the HRC's investigation program and is currently completing her new book on disappearances in Mexico. And finally, Professor Sylvanna Falcón, who's a longtime friend and collaborator with our center, with our investigation program, and she's joining us tonight from UC Santa Cruz to moderate. We also have a specially edited cut of the recent BBC documentary on Ayotzinapa that the producers were kind enough to edit for us for this very event that will fill in much of the background of this convoluted story. At the end of the event, we will share an opportunity for students and members of the UC Berkeley community to attend a small meeting at the HRC with Omar and ourselves to learn more about this ongoing case and engage in a conversation. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors for getting the word out about this event, the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, the Miller Institute for Global Challenges and the Law, Berkeley Journalism, La Alianza here at Berkeley Law, the Latin American Leadership Society, and the Berkeley Law Human Rights Clinic. At this point, I'd like to introduce our moderator. Sylvanna Falcón is a professor of Latin American and Latino Studies and the founder and director of the Human Rights Digital Investigations Lab at UC Santa Cruz. She is an award-winning author, educator, and scholar of Latin American studies, feminist studies, and human rights. She was also a consultant for the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its causes and consequences. Please welcome Professor Sylvanna Falcón.
Thank you so much for the invitation to this event. It's my honor to introduce Lene Guercke. Lene Guercke is a senior researcher with the Berkeley Human Rights Center's Investigations Program. She holds a PhD in law from the University of Leuven in Belgium and a master's in human rights from the University College London. Her PhD thesis, which she's currently turning into a book, is about disappearances committed by organized criminal groups and includes a study on the issue of disappearances in Mexico in the context of the so-called war on drugs. Before starting her PhD, she spent several years working on human rights-related topics in Mexico. Lene will be providing us with some opening remarks about disappearances in Mexico in order for us to understand the extent and depth of this particular case.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, Sylvanna, for the introduction and for the Human Rights Center for the invitation to participate in this event. So I was asked to give a little bit of general context about disappearances in Mexico to situate the case of Ayotzinapa in the broader human rights crisis in the country. And I wanted to start out by briefly talking about what enforced disappearances are, because I don't know if everybody here is actually familiar with this human rights violation and crime. Disappearances essentially refer to a person being abducted against their will, usually with some sort of involvement of the state, followed by complete denial about what happened to them or where they are, or any information connected to that. And this can go on for hours, days, months, years, or decades in many cases. And this not only violates multiple rights of the disappeared person, but it also, what makes disappearances especially cruel is the impact that they have on the relatives or loved one of the disappeared person. Because the relatives or loved ones are left in this limbo of not knowing what happened to the person, whether they're alive, whether they're dead, whether they're okay, if they're ever going to reappear. they can't engage in sort of the traditional rituals of mourning if a person had died. And that is a form of torture that can go on for decades. And this can not only have a really detrimental effect on the relatives, but also on societies as a whole, because it creates this kind of chilling effect of uncertainty. So moving to the Mexican context, I could talk about this for a long time. So to reduce it to 10 minutes, I thought I would highlight 3 main points to illustrate the human rights and the humanitarian crisis that Mexico is currently experiencing, especially in relation to disappearances. The first point is the dimension of the crisis and its complexity. So as of today, over 115,000 people have been disappeared or gone missing since 1950 in Mexico. And of these, over 101,000 have disappeared or gone missing since 2006. So these are just staggering numbers that we can't even really wrap our heads around, but this is a huge number. And what happened in 2006, this kind of turning point, is the beginning of what is called the war on drugs, which basically refers to the government sending out the military to fight drug trafficking organizations, which essentially led to an explosion of violence and human rights violations in the country and ultimately the human rights crisis it faces today. At the same time, there's also a forensic crisis in the country. Just this week, a new investigation came out that there's currently 72,000 unidentified bodies in the hands of Mexican authorities. And then in addition to that, there is probably thousands of illegal mass graves across the country, so the numbers are probably much higher. So all of these numbers I've just given you, they're huge, but they're probably much higher. And it's a very complex situation because there is no single explanation of why all of this is happening. There are different groups of victims, there are different groups of perpetrators, and all of this is kind of a context of complex state and criminal violence. And among the perpetrators, there are state forces, and here we're talking about the military and the police and different levels of police, federal, state, municipal, as well as organized crime groups. But those aren't always separate actors. The lines between them are often really blurry, and in some cases, they actively collude with each other. And the case of Ayotzinapa, and you'll see this in the video and hear about it with Omar, is a very stark example of this type of collusion and how far it goes. The second point I wanted to highlight is the impunity, which is pretty much absolute in cases of disappearances in Mexico. It's like 98, 99%, something like that. So pretty much absolute. And this means there are no effective investigations in general, and which also means that there's actually very little information about the issue, because if nothing gets investigated, we don't really know much about the modus and the perpetrators. And there's no accountability. And what that then means is that this contributes to a repetition of this crime because there's no incentive to stop, there are no consequences. And again, the case of Ayotzinapa is quite illustrative of that, because this is actually a case kind of unique because it did have an effective investigation in which Omar played a big part, yet the case continues in impunity, and you'll see more about that later on. And the last part I wanted to highlight is the fight of the relatives and their mobilization around this issue. So since the disappearances really started, or since the beginning of the war on drugs, relatives have been demanding truth and have been demanding justice and answers about what happened to their loved ones. It wasn't really until the case of Ayotzinapa, and it's also significant in that way, that the issue of disappearances in Mexico really gathered a lot of national and international attention. And it not only led to the creation of special, unique international mechanisms to investigate the case or support the domestic investigation, but also internally it led to the creation of the Movement for Our Disappeared in Mexico, which is a movement by relatives organizations called colectivos, which nowadays there are over 80 organizations in that. And it also propelled some relatives to take matters into their own hands and go out and search for mass graves, sometimes really just equipped with a pick and a shovel, getting trained in how to identify mass graves, how to identify human bodies, in the face of inaction by the state. And this movement and the relatives organization put a lot of pressure on the government, and it did lead to the adoption of a general law on enforced disappearances and the creation of several institutions for the search, for the investigation, also to deal with the forensic crisis. And I want to end with where we are now, because even though a lot of these institutions have been created at some point, unfortunately, so far they've been ineffective. And especially in the past years, they've been starved of resources, they've been undermined and or actively blocked in their work. And again, the investigation of Ayotzinapa is a really glaring example of that, and you'll hear about that in the film, how an investigation that actually got pretty far was then ultimately stalled. And so all of this, unfortunately, leaves me with a rather bleak picture of the situation at the moment. It's pretty catastrophic in terms of the numbers and what that means, especially for the relatives. And it's unfortunately only gotten worse in the last years. And this really leaves us with a couple of questions about what is needed to change, and especially now that there's a new government incoming, how pressure can be exerted on that new government to truly prioritize this issue, to address it, to build strong and effective institutions with resources, and finally respond to the demands of relatives. And so 10 years after the disappearance of the 43 students from Ayotzinapa, this case is really, it's one among tens of thousands of cases. That's important to keep in mind. But it's really a case that illustrates both the possible advances when you have international support and when you have committed individuals who are genuinely interested in the pursuit of justice and accountability. But it also really illustrates the setbacks regarding disappearances in Mexico that are linked to the persistent impunity in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Lene, for those that context. We are going to show a short video from the documentary filmmakers, and then we'll show the larger clip that has been prepared for the special event. So that was just 30 minutes of a 2-hour documentary. And you can see in that 30 minutes the incredible layers of complexity of this case. It is my honor to introduce Omar Gomez Trejo. Omar Gomez Trejo is a lawyer from UNAM and has a master's degree from Flasco. He worked for 12 years in the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the UN in different countries. He was the executive secretary of the interdisciplinary group of independent experts, which you saw in the film, for the Ayotzinapa case. He was the lead prosecutor of the special unit for the investigation and litigation of the Ayotzinapa case. Currently, as you heard, he is a visiting scholar. You are very lucky to have him here with you at the Human Rights Center at the law school in Berkeley. And it's my great honor to welcome Omar to share a few words. Well, why don't you tell us you've seen this documentary a few times, you're seeing it now with this community here at Berkeley. Just tell me how you're feeling.
It's 10 years, it's probably easy to say. Be part of this case is completely changed my life since when it started. And I don't know, it's like too many things happen. Ayotzinapa is a very complex case. It's not easy to understand in 2 hours on too many documentaries and reports now that is completely published in public. And I don't know, it's a lot. It's been a while. And the thing that I just wanted to reivindicate now is like the big strain and big courage that the family has. Because they, they've been pushing for 10 years. Keep an eye on this case, not only in Mexico, it's in the world. And that's what the victims show us. And that's really important. I think I just wanted to recall that. And also, it's also the reflects the effect that creates in the international community to react to create these special mechanisms. Also, one important thing that I just wanted to recall is the political will that the President AMLO has at the beginning of his administration to create this complex of instruments inside Mexico to find truth and justice. And that's very important. Obviously now, I saw yesterday the news, and we had a completely different 180 degrees narrative from the president, which is really sad because it's not reflects the compromise that he assumed when he started. Just saying, let you know that the narrative is that he wanted to achieve truth and justice for the families, but a group of people, the NGOs, the families, the experts, myself, the international community doesn't let that happen. And we change the narrative and attack the army and make it responsible of the disappearance, which is not true. And I can say that with a strong conviction that is not true.
So, Omar, you just shared a little bit about the families, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what it was like for you as a special prosecutor to talk to these families, to have them having to recount, their loved one. What was that like for you in trying to search for truth?
Well, we just took this as a prosecutor. I'm not a prosecutor, which is good. I'm a researcher now, and from my vision and my experience working in human rights cases, the victims are the center of what you gotta do for, find justice, search and to make accountable the person. Obviously, it's the same perspective as a human rights violation as a crime. And we had a great communication with the families and also with the survivors. These students that you saw, these young kids, for example, that was the basis of the investigation that we tried to gather. They were there. They saw the things. They feel. So even you create these bounds, with the people, and that's really something. In Mexico, the prosecutors in other cases in the general attorney's office have probably a different perspective from that. They believe they probably someone who saw the victims from the high level. I just wanted to be part of the same level because it's just good. You're getting information from that. And that's probably part of the thing that I wanted to, that my team has the same culture, impression, the same compromise. Obviously, you have to let you feel the anger and the strong feelings what the victims has. You got to feel that as a someone who's working with that. But also that means that you transfer that in an energy that give you the legitimacy to work for the right reason. So it's that, and we create obviously great mechanisms to transmit information for the families like this way. So imagine I was sitting here with myself, with my team, and the families in the front, and they just start asking, Omar, please tell us what's next. What are you working on? And say, well, we're here. Omar, what's your problems? Where are your limits? Who is pushing you? And that was the communication, because the families play a key role in this structure that the government created, and obviously they had even the position to talk with the president and talk with higher-ranking authorities, say, please give the information, provide information. Something is going on here. Please do it. So that's really, really powerful to have an investigation. So if you're gonna do investigations in the future, please try to put the victims that you're working for in the center. You're not defending. If you're a prosecutor, you're a human rights officer, you're not defending. You are doing something to make responsibility and accountability for others. In that way, in that space, also you create truth. So that's what we try to do during that time.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things I'm struck by the story, of course, is that at first there was so much promise, right? There was so much potential. There was a willingness to share information. You were acquiring and getting all of this information, so you were, trusting the process. And then, of course, everything changes. But could you talk a little bit about how did you trust your own instincts? Like once you realize, wait, something is happening here. The promises and commitments that were made to me to do this investigation are now being compromised. At what point did you realize your instincts were telling you this was not going in the way that you wanted it to go?
One thing that you need to do as an investigator is have a clear idea of your evidences. Have a clear idea about what you have in the desk. So when I arrived this investigation in 2019, it was 800 docs of documents about this case. Each doc has 1,000 pages. Mm-hmm. So it was a lot of documents. But I work with the UN, I work with the group of experts. So the history is around. So we try to get the best pieces of this investigation, and we settled the basis to start receiving victims and people who were in the scenario, crime scenarios to start the investigation. So my point is obviously you develop a feeling to saying this guy is lying to me. Mm-hmm. This guy is not telling me the truth. But also, it's good to have that kind of witnesses or people who give you information. And it's good and it's better when you have documents, when you have expertise, when you have all these kind of evidences. And I want to stop here just in one of the main evidences that we rescue from witnesses, and always we try to confront with documents and also with analysis. And in probably a year later when we started the investigation, we received 60 videos from the Civil Intelligence Agency in Mexico. And when we started watching those videos, me and my team, it was like going 5 floors going down and visit the hell. And because those videos reflects interviews in facilities of the Army or the Navies, people torture, and people who wanted to create a narrative about what the authorities wanted in that time to create the historical truth. So you get in that, you get in, this addiction to say you don't want to leave, to stop it, create that. And when you have this kind of evidences, for example, you feel strong. You feel like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Mm-hmm. And also, like I say, you confront that with another information, additional information in your investigation, so you get the whole picture. So that's what we try to create, the whole picture. You imagine, you see here now the disappearance of a student during that night, and also in a different, in a distance like 1 month, 2 months, the historical truth. So you got two main events. But we wanted to, when we started digging and getting documents and interview people, we received close 300 witnesses in the small pieces. It's like the big puzzle. You receive a big bunch of little pieces of puzzle, and you start, you doing puzzles, you started with the borders. You find the plain side. So it's like doing that. I don't know.
Yeah. So I was also struck by the role of the Argentinian group that came and supported, the anthropology group that came and supported, obviously, the investigation. How did that help, having kind of an international investigative unit also come in? or did that provide added legitimacy? Did that provide, added confidence in the evidence and things that you were collecting?
Oh, yes, it's unquestionable. The EF they were part of those solid people that you have next to you that give you some certain to the evidences. That was an important role. And the Argentinians is not forensics for the state. They are the forensics for the families. So you see Cristina, she say like, we're not gonna believe anything until my forensics say, yes, you can't believe in that. And also the forensics work with us in the search for the students. We find two students, Sylvanna Guerrero de la Cruz and Christian Alexander Rodriguez. So we find small evidences in a place where the source give us. So we work with forensics over there like a year. We rescue many pieces, thousands of pieces. And only 20 of those pieces were taken to Innsbruck, which was a specialized laboratory to identify and work DNA samples very damaged. So this is the history about this case. Like I say, it's very complex to understand, have too many faces. But the forensics, the Argentinian team, with this, I just want to say that the Argentinian team, it was always there, so that give you something like really strong, way to act like the correct way. Yeah.
So, we're here on the 10-year anniversary. We're here at the UC Berkeley campus. What do you want UC Berkeley students, the community here at large, what do you want them to, how do you want them to keep attention on this particular case? Because it did receive the global attention, right? Now it's been 10 years. Yep. But what should folks from this community, how do they keep attention? What do they do to still raise awareness that around this particular case?
I mean, Mexico is just right next to the U.S. There's a humanitarian crisis, just like Lene say. Mm-hmm. We're talking about like thousands of people disappeared in the last 15 years. And that's have to call us our attention in the way where you are and the things that you do. I think Mexico needs hands, needs support. And I hopefully the new authorities can do something different, something better, try to find the students they can return to their houses. And that's probably something really important. I don't know what you do, but if you get this interested to work in a strong case such as an Ayotzinapa, Ayotzinapa is one of those hundreds and thousands cases that happening in Mexico. So I think that's really important to do. I know Mexico has changed a lot in the last years. Now, as John Givler said, the army has a lot of power now, and it receives more power in the last days because they increased the power of force by the Guardia Nacional. It's now under the army, which is, and also there's civil controls and those autonomies and institutions that could be a check and balance of the strong executive authority that we have in Mexico. I'm worried about it. I'm worried about it. So, but also I see there's always, with the creativity, with the intelligence, create new things, new visions, that would be amazing. And also, this is what, for example, the lawyers or the families reflects. They have this huge case in front, and they start looking for new answers, making a mix between international organizations and mechanisms with local mechanisms. So they've been just creating during these 2 years, the 10 years, keep the eye on the case, which is really, really hard to do that. And they just did it. So, I mean, I'm here at the center. If we can just keep talking, probably, I just wanted to listen from you. What are your questions? And And
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you again for this.
So I have one more question before I open it up to all of you. Earlier, you and I were talking about the connections that students from UC Berkeley should have with the students of Ayotzinapa, and I think that would be something important to share. Our earlier conversation about the connections that we see amongst these students.
Yeah, that was because it was you and me. Now it's like a lot of people following me. It's just-
It was really
Yeah.
beautiful. I want you to hear
I think
it.
the connection between is like I saw young people. There's books even that talk about the life of these rural, indigenous, poor people, and they just wanted to have a dream, and that's hard. You know? They don't have the chance to do that now. And I saw your faces, and you're young people, and you got the chance to do your dreams too. So this is something to think about it. This is something to do something powerful. They wanted to transform their reality from the small communities where they live. They work in the small, poorest communities in Mexico. We visit those places because we were working all over Guerrero. Any source that comes and tells us, you need to looking for you need to do your search over there. So obviously we visit these small communities, and they live in a very, very, poor conditions. So, but they make this huge effort to teach people to learn languages. They speak both languages, the Nahuatl and different languages in the Guerrero area, and they teach you this like how to learn numbers and that kind of things. Which is something beautiful from the people to teach. There's professors here saying you value that, your students too. So, and that's probably something that it should call our attention to. Reflects from the human side. That is really important for me, for example.
So many of these students, right, wanted to become educators in their communities, right? So a lot of students always say to me, I'm going to college wherever, but I'm going to go back and make a difference in my community, right? That's something that any of you have ever felt that you share with these students, right? If any of you have ever thought, I'm here at UC Berkeley because I want to make a difference at my community back home, wherever your community is from, that is something you share with these Ayotzinapa students. We would like to open it. I'd like to invite Lene up as well to join us here at the table, but we'd love to hear your questions. You have esteemed guests here with you. And Alexi's going to go around with the microphone, so if you have your question.
Thank you so much for being here. I was born in Mexico, so I have, can you hear me better? I was born in Mexico, so I have a close relation to the things that happen, and I try to go back as often as I can. So thank you so much for your work, because I know that it impacts people so much in the communities and also here. And my question is, I have these conversations with my dad where he thinks that AMLO is doing so much work for communities, and I often struggle to articulate how to explain to him that he's also doing some harmful work. So I just want to know what your opinion is as far as his involvement in this and how it negatively impacted the investigation, as we've seen in the documentary, and how do you think that, because the upcoming president has such a close relationship to AMLO, how that will also impact the amount of work that she will put into the investigation and bringing justice to these families?
Sorry, I just came here. Also, now, I don't know if you want, we just one by one, or? Okay. Yeah, I think Claudia, the new president has a great, obviously, I'm not going to judge the government of Presidente AMLO because I work in this very specific, and I want to be serious with that. Obviously, I could have an opinion about the politics, and also he just increased the social programs and impact in small communities such as the one that I'm talking to. But it's kind of like a different contradictions, at least for me, that you support these kind of communities, but also you take or you try to avoid the responsibility to taking care about justice. Justice is really important. Justice is an answer for violence. And Mexico now has a large scale of violence. So which is the answer? Has to be the justice. We have a large number of impunity, 99.3 impunity. So unforced disappearance is also a perfect crime because nobody investigates, but also the effects of the enforced disappearance is not only the person who is disappeared, it's also the clues and the information who can reach you to be the responsible of this crime. So that's another important point to rescue about this reflection. So understand this case, it could be probably, and this is what we wanted to try to do, it could be an answer to this big crisis. We wanted to demonstrate and show that justice by the law, by the rule of law in a democratic country can do something for these kind of big cases. And I have the hope, I have to say, because that's what I learned always. This is a human rights work. You always keep the hope. You have to. Because I have the hope that the President, Sheinbaum, could deal with the case, have the right answers for the families that demanding truth and justice, and bring a narrative supported by evidence. What happened with their kids? I mean, one question that we asked when we were talking, it was like, why they wanted to create this big cover-up? So the size of this cover-up is the size of the big thing that they just wanted to hide from, to bring it in the light, to bring justice for that. So I hope that President and the new President can do that. Have hope, follow the advices of the advice of the families and the lawyers, which have this big picture of the case, and have this sensibility that any authority in my country needs to have to make deal about this reality and violence.
Lene, I wondered if you wanted to comment a little bit too, your thoughts on what this new incoming president, in terms of the enforced disappearances, the things that you study, how are you assessing this transition?
Sure, thanks. Well, difficult question. I think Omar and I have spoken about this a little bit, and I think I would just echo the hope, because you never know. I mean, just as AMLO promised a lot of progress, and then in the end we've just heard what happened, maybe it's going to be the other way around with Claudia Sheinbaum. I mean, she's not promising not to progress, of course, but she might positively surprise us. So I'm also hopeful for that. I think it's really difficult to assess what's going to happen. Of course, taking into consideration that steps that have been taken in recent years that are quite worrying in terms of the power that the military has gotten, and the very recent judicial reform, which leads to the popular election of judges, which is also quite concerning. We'll see how she deals with that and how that plays out. But I would echo that it's hope for everybody, for the relatives of the 43 students from Ayotzinapa, but also the broader community of relatives of the disappeared in Mexico.
It's right, second time, yes.
It's okay. Yeah, okay. I mean, you just touched upon like literally right now, but what are the expectations now that with the judicial reform, the judicial positions are going to be up for election? How do you guys see that affecting this specific case?
Yeah, I know this. You want to start? You say that judicial reform. I think one important thing of any democratic country is the division of powers. And the division of powers have to be supported at least by the judicial branch, independence and autonomy of that. If we don't have that now, if we just have the control of the legislative power and the executive power, because in Mexico we have a strong president. This has come from many years. So probably that's the answer. These two powers go control the third one. And that's something really, really interesting, because I just resigned this position because they interfere in my decision as a prosecutor, and that's something that you gotta respect as a public servant. And one thing that we always demanded is to have a special system in Mexico City or in a different state in Mexico that have the same vision as we had in Ayotzinapa. So we were looking for a special group of judges to control the whole picture and vision that we had at the case. And we never received that. So we work in 8 different states in Mexico, litigating and working with judges, processing that kind of things. And my point is, and we always say, well, this judge is really good. He respects that. So give you the chance of the confrontation, for example, in evidences, and that's when you feel like this is real work. I don't know if the actual prosecutors and the people and their family lawyers and that, we have that with this change of the judicial system. Because if you had the 2 powers that control the third one, which is the judicial one, you will not have an independent judge to resolve these cases that need to be resolved by judges. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just important to keep in mind, and for me, when I first heard about this idea of electing judges, my first thought was, this is a highly corrupt country. And if in a country where corruption is like one of the major issues, which then also leads to this kind of collusion in grave human rights violations, and then you start electing judges, I don't know how that's gonna work, but it worries me. What I do think is probably going to happen is that civil society is going to try to resist it. They're going to try to, I think, probably litigate against it. And, hopefully with the judges that are still there, they're going to get somewhere. So I would say let's hope for that, because Mexico does have a very active civil society, that is very concerned about what is happening. And that's another way, I think, you were asking about international support or what people here can do. I think keeping an eye on what's happening and making sure that we're informed about the things that are happening in Mexico, and sort of bringing some scrutiny to it, because, and this is an outside perspective, but Mexico, the state, is really good at keeping up a very good image. Right now it's become the destination country for a lot of US Americans who go there and live, because it's like a really cool thing to move to Mexico City. But often people are not aware of everything that's also happening. So I think just sort of maintaining that scrutiny is really important.
And it's going to take you hours to vote the whole planillas that you will to fill it if you live in Mexico City. It's going to take 13 hours, something like that. So it's not going to be easy.
Hello, thank you for the panel and all your sharing. I was watching Andrés Manuel López Obrador morning conference today, and he said there's no evidence about the participation of the army in this case, right? So I want to ask you a question. Do you think there's a difference between the version of Murillo Karam and Andrés Manuel version right now? Because it seems to me like this is another historical truth. And well, you were there, so I just want to know if it's like this, and if it's the same version they are trying to use or present to the families and to the public. Thank you.
It looks probably the same. Yes. I mean, this one thing that I have to say about it's not. I said in the screening. They wanted to kill the message, the messenger because the message is so strong. So the message is the investigation. This is documents, videos, photographies, reconstructions, expertise that this investigation has. That's the message. And that's what they need to turn to watch that and figure it out what they're gonna do with that. They can't destroy that evidence. Even one thing that I just really feel good by myself is that we request the last indictment with the last piece of evidence that we recover. So there's nothing that we just not show to a judge in the prosecutor's office. I don't know, I mean, that's just out 2 years ago. But we try to gather the whole information and just put inside of the desk of the judges. So now the judges and the prosecutor's office has this whole evidence. But that's the thing, like I said, is we wanted to create an effect that this investigation can conduct an answer for violence. So this is complex case, new. I mean, we just, for disappearance, 60s, 70s, it was the army, the state disappearing people, the revolucionarios, and that thing. Now there's another ingredient, and that's the organized crime. That's the violence. That's the people who control areas in Mexico. So this new ingredient is linked to the security forces, which supposed to be 15 years ago when they declared this war against cartel drugs, they're gonna take them to prisons and resolve this situation. But now Ayotzinapa shows, and probably shows from more cases, that never happened. It was, sorry guys, we're gonna do business now. If we're doing business, we're doing business. So that's what we saw, for example, when we read those documents in Chicago. So it was fascinating reading that piles of documents like, wow, what is this? So they did business together. So yeah, looks like, but now with the fake and tortured people in the historical truth, now they have good evidence, good witnesses. But they, for example, start putting people who collaborate with this investigation that I conduct, they put it back in the prison because they say, no, these were bad people. So this is also you playing with these two moral game, like, no, the law can give you the chance that you can do these kind of measures with witnesses because you wanted to know, you wanted to get through, you wanted to get justice. And now it changed the figure. So this narrative, this third narrative, if you want to just put it like that, this third narrative, it turns something like very similar. It's a group of, gang members. This is transnational crime. This is Chicago. This is Iguala. Buses cross the border. They arrive. You hear the DEA agent. This is $1 million returning to Mexico for bribes. The amount, for example, paying bribes in Mexico was big money. So that's what I say. It's a shame. But this is when you put another version of the narrative. We have the narrative of the violence, but also we have the narrative by the families. We're not asking that you give us money and send us back home. We're just demanding truth. Tell me where's my kid, and tell me where I can just cry my kid if he's dead or he's alive. He's just gonna knock the door and gonna comes to my place. So this is what we do the job. I mean, we did this job,